All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started with our program tonight. Hope everyone enjoyed their dinner tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Mr. Erick Rheam. Some of you are familiar with Eric, but our speaker today has been training and publicly speaking for 22 years. He's delivered presentations to military officers in the United States Army, athletes, high school students, business leaders, and public officials. Eric has a long and rich utility background for over 2 decades. He served as a director of education for an international public speaking training firm and now personally trains professional athletes, celebrities, executives, and professional speakers on the art of communications. A published author and graduate of the United States Military Academy, Eric travels the country and speaks to organizations and associations on human dynamics and achieving significance. Eric's mission is to motivate high achievers to live life beyond excellence and to dig deeper into human experience so that his audience will become inspired to pursue significance. If you all would please welcome and help me welcome Erick Rheam.
All right. Okay, I'm living my good life right now. Look at that picture. You ever see a couple walking down the road and the significant other, she's like, man, that guy definitely married up. Come on now, I did a pretty good job, did I not? So I'm living a good life right now. Things are going really well for my family and I. But I got to tell you, it wasn't always like that. I actually hit my rock bottom in 2005 as a utility professional up in Loveland, Colorado, northern Colorado. Now, the way I define rock bottom, folks, it's not what happens to you, because life happens to you, doesn't it? Things are going to happen in your life. Families are going to move away from you, Kelly, right? Things are going to happen to you in life. I don't define that as rock bottom. I define rock bottom as when you get to a point in your life when you let people down that are closest to you. And based on that definition, folks, I hit my rock bottom as a utility professional in 2005, and my rock bottom came in the form of 3 gut punches. Gut punch number 1, I deserve better. Those were the words that my brand new bride, Aaliyah, said to me as she'd been crying. She had bloodshot eyes. She's only 5'2", gorgeous little doe eyes, looking up at me, and told me that I was not living up to her expectation as a husband. And folks, that hurts. Because out of all the men in the world that she could have chose to be her husband, she chose me. And out of all the women in the world, I chose her. And when your best friend, folks, looks at you and says you're not good enough, that's a gut punch. Gut punch number 2, get out. Those were the words that I said to my dad when I put my hands on my dad in anger and threw him out of my house. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2005, my twin boys were just born. I lived in Colorado. My family, my mom and dad, lived in Indiana. They wanted to see their new grandkids. I know a lot of you have grandchildren out here. You want to see your new grandkids, right, when they're born? My dad and mom wanted to come out and spend some time with us, and because I lived in Colorado, we didn't see each other very often. My mom and dad were scheduled to stay with us for 10 days at our house. My dad and I lasted 2 days before we got into a drop-dead argument, and I got so mad at my own father, who was the best man at my wedding, my hero. I got so mad at my dad, I found myself throwing my own father out of my house. Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever been so mad before? You almost have like that outer body experience. It's almost like you're watching a movie and you know you're wrong and you know you're going to regret it, but you can't stop yourself. My dad went home that day. He got in the airplane and took off. We didn't speak for over 6 months. Gut punch number 3, you're suspended. That's what my human resources director at the utility told me after a week-long investigation for my own employees. I was in a leadership position where they said I was abusing my power. You see, folks, I had just got out of the military. I was still transitioning in the civilian world, and I had not made that transition. I was treating my colleagues like soldiers, and they were going to have none of it. And after a week-long investigation, my HR manager said, Eric, you just need to take a week off, unpaid leave, and think about what kind of attitude you're going to have when you come back to the utility. So in 2005, ladies and gentlemen, after those 3 gut punches, I found myself in a dark place, wondering, how did I find myself here and how was I going to get out of it? But I want to take you back a few years before that. I want to take you back to 1996. I went to the United States Military Academy. I was recruited to run cross country and track for them. The deal was I would run with the best in the country. They were top 5 in the country at the time for track and field and cross country. In exchange, I was going to have to serve 5 years in the military. My first duty station was I was to lead this platoon across the Sava River in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Do you guys remember what was going on in the mid-90s in Bosnia? It was pretty bad, folks. In fact, it was World War II level genocide in Bosnia. And if you were the wrong religion, it didn't matter if you were man, woman, or child, they would execute you in front of your family and put you in an unmarked grave. It got so bad that the world could no longer look the other way. And so they formed what was called Operation Joint Endeavor. And the United States, along with our allies, converged on Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is about the size of the state of Alabama. And my job with that platoon was to separate the Muslims and the Serbs from killing each other. Now, in that picture, the average age of those soldiers are 23, 22 years old. I was 23 years old in that picture. I was pretty naive about humanity. I grew up in Indiana, like here in Columbus, Ohio. Folks, when I went to the United States Military Academy, I didn't even know what daylight savings time was because we didn't switch our clocks in Indiana. I was pretty naive about humanity, but when I got into Bosnia, things changed. Because you see, it's one thing to read about in the history books of what happened during World War II, right? It's one thing to read it on the pages in the history books. It's another thing to watch it on TV like what's going on right now in the Ukraine. It's another thing to be on ground, ladies and gentlemen, and to see it firsthand, to smell it, to taste it, to touch it. And that year, as a 23-year-old young man, I began to travel around the country and I began to see all the things, all the horrific things that humans were willing to do to one another. I began to ask a fundamental question to myself at 23 years old. I began to ask myself a question. That question was simple. Do we all possess that same level of darkness? Or is that just something we read about in the history books that happened a long time ago? Surely that doesn't happen now, right? Or maybe it just happens in some far-off country where we don't speak the language. That wouldn't happen here in Columbus, would it? And I got the answer to that question in 2 fundamental forms. The first one was when we redeployed back from Bosnia to Germany. You see, for those of you that are in the military and you've served overseas and you've been in situations that you could be put in harm's way, one of the dirty little secrets that we don't talk about with our military is we ask our young men and women, you guys saw the picture, the average age 23 years old, we ask young 20-somethings to get to a point where they're willing to get to a point mentally, physically, and emotionally that they would take a weapon, they would point it at another human being and be willing to pull that trigger in anger to support our way of life. That takes a certain mentality and training to do that. And we want our young men and women to go off into far-off lands to do that for our country. But when they redeploy back, we want them to flip a switch and become normal again. And folks, that's not how humans work. That's not how human dynamics work. And so when we redeployed back from Bosnia and we went to Germany, what we discovered is that our soldiers had a hard time. We didn't know what PTSD was back then. And they began to hurt one another. They began to abuse their family members. They began to abuse the German nationals. And I was tagged as a special investigator. And I had to investigate some of these crimes. And I got to see some of the horrific things that our own soldiers were doing to their families. And these same soldiers that I served with. And in 2005, ladies and gentlemen, when I put my hands on my own father, and I grabbed my dad, my hero, and I pushed my dad out of my house in anger, I recognized that anger. I recognized that darkness. It's the same darkness I experienced in Bosnia, and I felt it in my own heart. And the answer to that question was, yes, not only do I possess that same level of darkness, but everyone in this room, you do as well, if the conditions were right. And so in 2005, that first day of suspension, when I put on my clothes to go to work, I couldn't go to work. For the first time in my adult life, I had nowhere to go. Steve, I had no identity. My company told me not to come there. Think about if your company, the people you work with, says, don't show up. And so I had a routine. I had to do something. So I told my wife I'd be back a little later. I jumped into my car. I took a drive. About 45 minutes later, I found myself in a small little town called Niwot, Colorado. It's a small little town that's about 15 minutes outside of Boulder, about 45 minutes away from where I live. It was far enough where I could get away and kind of reflect on my life, but it was close enough if my wife needed me, I could get back. I went to this small little town. Think about Hallmark. It was a picturesque little town, beautiful town. And I went to this small coffee shop right in the middle of the town. I grabbed a cup of coffee, and I sat next to a little window overlooking downtown and started to sip this coffee and begin to reflect. That was my life. I began to think about how I got myself in this situation where my marriage was on the rocks, I wasn't talking to my dad, and my career was in shambles. And so as I began to sit there for that 8 hours that day, I began to think about all the things I was doing in my career at that point. And I began to realize that every time I got some momentum in my life, there was always this unknown force that started to whisper in my ear. And it would influence me to do these bad things, these negative things, and do something stupid. You ever been there? Life is going great, but then you do something stupid. You're like, why did I do that? It was like 2 steps forward, 30 steps back. And so I went there every day at that coffee shop and reflected on that. And I began to realize there was this unknown force that was getting in my way, and I decided to go ahead and give it a name. And I began to call it the beast. I realized that this beast was this negative voice in my heart that was riding shotgun in my life. Every one of you has the beast in your life. It's that negative voice that goes to bed with you at night and it whispers in your ear. You know what I'm talking about, right? You're not good enough for what they're going to find out you're a fraud. Or how come she doesn't respect you? Or how come your boss never acknowledges you when you do something well? How come that guy got the promotion and you didn't? How come your daughter no longer speaks to you anymore? Doesn't she know what you've done for her? It's that little voice. You ever wake up in the middle of the night and you can't turn your head off? You can't stop thinking? That's the beast. It never shuts up and never goes away. And the beast was in my life. And I began to ask myself, can I get rid of the beast? And the answer to that is no. That's just life on planet Earth, folks. Each and every one of you has that voice. You can't get rid of it. What I decided to do, though, the question I had to ask myself was at that moment in 2005, if the beast was running shotgun in my life, could I tame it? And I was determined that the answer had to be yes. But ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't the whole thing. That wasn't the deeper story. There was something deeper that I had to uncover. It took me all week to do that. In fact, did you know I went to that same coffee shop every day that week? I was going there so much, by the end of it, I knew the mayor of the town. I knew all the baristas. Then they had to think I was weird because I would get 1 cup of coffee. That was it. And I would sit there for 8 hours like that cup of coffee gave me the entitlement to sit down at this table all day long. And at the end of the week, I began to realize a couple things. One is that there was a deeper problem that I had to deal with. And the problem was simple as I began to uncover it. In fact, that suspension was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me because it forced me to think. And I realized that the problem was that I lacked significance in my life. And here's what I've discovered. This is my entire premise of why I travel the country now. I believe every one of you in this room, including myself back in 2005, we all desire to live a significant life, to know that our life matters, don't we? None of us in this room wants to get at the end of our life, and as we realize and we reflect on our life, that it meant nothing to nobody. That would be horrifying. Everybody in this room wants to make an impact, don't you? You want to make an impact in your careers. By the way, did you know the average human being spends 82,000 hours of their life working in a career, Doug? You're going to invest 82,000 hours of your life. And if you're going to invest that time, don't you want to know that it meant something? How about the people that are your family? You want to have an impact on your family, to know that your family is better off because you were part of it, and your communities. All of us wants to achieve some level of significance in my life, in our lives. And I realized that week that one of the things I was missing is I didn't have significance in my life. I wasn't making an impact. Listen, folks, I had talent. I had energy, I had no purpose. And so what I did for the first time, I never have done this before, I sit down on that Friday afternoon, my last day of suspension, I pulled out a piece of paper, and for the first time, I wrote down, what does a meaningful life look like for me? Because I realized, folks, if I didn't make some changes, then things weren't going well for me. In fact, if you looked at my family, back in 2005, if you looked at that family right there and you didn't know us from Adam, we look like we're a pretty normal family, don't we? Beautiful wife, healthy kids. I was on a fast track in leadership for the utility. But the problem, folks, is I was just downright miserable. And I felt bad because how dare I be miserable? Because there's so many other people worse off than me. I don't have any right to be miserable. But here's what I learned. If you're here in your life and there's somewhere else you want to be and you have that gap, that is straight up misery, folks. And it's all relative. If you're not where you want to be in your life and you're miserable, you're miserable. And when you're miserable, guess what? You make everybody else miserable around you, and that's where I was. So I decided that day in 2005, on that Friday, that I was going to go on a journey. I was going to turn things around at my utility with my wife and with my dad. Because here was the good news. I realized I still had my wife, thank the Lord. I still had my dad, and I still had my job. But if something didn't change, who knows what would happen? And I want to share with you the steps that I learned along the way. I learned 5 principles over the last decade and a half that I want to pass on to you. Can I tell you guys something? I've made a fundamental decision that I want to communicate with utilities because I like utilities. I'm a fan of utilities. In fact, I got in the utility world because of a girl. Anybody ever do anything silly for love? This guy did. I met this young lady in Indiana. I was in Colorado. She had a boyfriend. Of course she did, because anybody like that, they always got somebody scratching around, right? So she had a boyfriend in New York, and I decided that was the woman for me. I wanted that woman to be my bride, and so I decided I was going to pick up and leave Colorado, and I was going to move to her town in Indiana, because I realized if I was close, geography, gentlemen, that would win the day, because the other guy was in New York. Guess what the job was? Key accounts for a local utility. I could care less about the job. I wanted the girl. Folks, in 6 months, my wife, that girl and I got engaged. 9 months later, we were married. Come on now. They don't call me A-game for nothing. I swung in there and I took care of business. But here's the thing. When I started working utilities, I fell in love with the linemen. I fell in love with the substation technicians. I fell in love with utility building clerks. I fell in love with the superintendent. I loved the utility mission. And so I made a decision that I want to travel the country working with utility professionals, unpacking these 5 principles that I discovered that got me out of my rock bottom while working at the utility. And so that's what I want to share with you today. Now, here's the thing. I've only got a few minutes today, so I'm only going to share some ideas with you. And I want to give you some resources if you want to continue the journey. And I come in and work directly with utilities if anybody's interested to come chat with me about that. But these are the 5 principles. Number 1, embrace your spiritual journey. Number 2, tame the beast. Number 3, leverage encouragement. Number 4, ignite your influence. Number 5, master human dynamics and communication. So let's start with embracing your journey. Do we have any runners out here? Any runners? No? What do you guys do in Columbus? Holy cow. All right. So I grew up with my dad, and my dad was a police officer. My dad was a police officer by day. He started out in New York. He was a policeman for 40 years. I grew up as a young boy watching my dad put on a uniform to go out and fight crime. He might as well have been a superhero. And then when my dad would come back, he would take off his uniform, and he'd go out in the cover of darkness, and he would paint parking lots all night long just to make ends meet, to provide for our family. So I grew up knowing my dad as a police officer and a serial entrepreneur, but my dad was also a runner. Whatever free time he had, he ran, and he would run a lot. And he started running marathons. And in April of 1983, my dad invited me to go with him to Boston because he qualified for the Boston Marathon. As a 10-year-old kid, folks, getting pulled out of school to go to Boston, that was awesome. And so I got to sit at the finish line and watch my dad cross that finish line. I was so excited. I was so fired up to watch my dad. But something funny happened after that race. Because when my dad finished that day in 1983, he never ran again. Up to that point, all I knew was my dad running. That was it. And suddenly he just stopped cold turkey. And I never even thought to ask him until many years later when I was at West Point and my dad came to visit me and we were sharing a beer for the first time. Shared a beer with my dad in downtown New York City. We were sitting there and I asked my dad for the first time, I was like 20 years old. I said, Dad, remember back in 1983 when you ran that Boston Marathon? You ran that race and you never ran again. What happened? And this is what my dad said. He said, Eric, during that marathon, I got to mile 18. And on that 18th mile, I started to cramp. I started to hurt. And for the first time, I found myself walking that 18th mile. I'd never done that before. And as I was walking, I began to reflect on why I was out there. And I realized that nobody cared that I was out here right now. Nobody cared I was running my guts out. And he said, at that point, I realized I didn't even care I was out here anymore. You see, what happened, ladies and gentlemen, is my dad realized that he lost his why. And when people lose their why, they lose their way. And my dad decided that he no longer needed to run anymore. There was a point in his life when that made sense, but it didn't make sense anymore. And here's what I believe. I believe that, like Mark Twain said, the 2 most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you found out why. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason why this is the first principle is when you wake up every single day and you go out into a hostile world, if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, the beast will eat you up and spit you out. People that don't know their why don't have a shot. That's why it's important. The first step is to understand your why. And so I believe there's a formula behind that. I believe that the formula for your why is where your passion, what you're willing to suffer for, intersects with your superpower. And when those two things come together, folks, that's when your why becomes a formulate. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and do that. So let's talk about passion. The way I identify passion is if you're willing to suffer for that, then it's passion. I'm not talking about your kids or your grandkids. I'm talking about what you do out in life, what you do to add value. And what I realize, folks, for whatever reason, I have a passion for people. I love this. A room full of people like this is just potential friends for me. And I love to hang out with people, but I love to hang out with people who are inspiring. But let me tell you something. I talk to about 20,000 people a year, and when you talk to that many people, there are some people who can be very hateful. They can say some mean things to me. They can say mean things about my kids. They can be very hurtful. But I'm willing to suffer for that because I know there's some people in the room tonight that need to hear what I'm about to say. And some of you, this is going to be an inflection point or a crossroads for you, and I'm willing to suffer for that because I have a passion for people. Now, the second thing is your superpower. Your superpower are the things that you're uniquely qualified to do. And there are 3 questions I recommend you ask yourself as you begin to unpack your superpower. Every one of you in here has a certain skill set. The first question is, what do others say are your powers? What do others say about you? You know, people will give you breadcrumbs just by saying, hey, you did a really good job in that meeting. Hey, you're very articulate when you do that, or you're really good at that. That happened to me in a situation kind of like this. I used to work at the utility, and I would speak on the behalf of the utility. And I was speaking at a conference. I was doing a breakout session. There was a guy at the other end of the room. He was somebody I respected. He'd been in the utility business for like 40 years. His name was Dan. And Dan sat in the back, and he listened to my message. And when I was done, Dan came up to me, and he said, Eric, you did a good job. And that made me feel good because I respected Dan. But he asked me a question nobody ever asked me before. He said, Eric, when are you going to do this full time? I said, what are you talking about, Dan? He goes, you're a pretty good speaker. I think you could be a professional speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, that planted a seed in my heart I never even thought about. And that started on a path for me to explore this idea only because one person asked me and told me I could be a good speaker. So what are other people saying about you? The next question you ask yourself is what comes easy to you? There are things that you just take for granted, that you do naturally, and you think everybody can do that. There's people in this room right now, you can open up a hood of the car, you could taste the oil and tell me what's wrong with it, right? You're really good with mechanical things. There's some people in here who can look at a spreadsheet and see patterns and numbers, and you just think everybody can do that. When I was speaking, I thought everybody would like to do this, Gene. I didn't realize that some people, if I asked them to come up on stage right now, some of you would come up here and throw open your mouth a little bit, wouldn't you? Right? This is something that comes naturally to me. And the last one is, where are you getting professional opportunities? Where are doors opening up to you? And when you begin to align your passion with your strengths, that's when your why starts to formulate. So when I begin to lean into my passion for people, and I begin to leverage my communication skills, I begin to realize that speaking was something that was my path. Each and every one of you will, once you align those things, will understand your why as well. So what is your superpower? Now let's talk about principle number 2, taming the beast. This is one of the most important ones. Because until we tame the beast, folks, it's always going to stand in your way from being the best version of yourself so you could cut through the whirlwind, rise above the chaos, live your level of significance, and ultimately live in peace. How many of you have heard of Jesse Owens before? In 1935, Jesse Owens, by the way, I just realized this, ran at Ohio State. Come on now. I just realized that. That's fantastic. So in 1935, at the Big Ten Championships, Jesse Owens, with the Ohio State University uniform on, competed in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and on that day at the Big Ten Championships, he set 3 world records and tied a 4th. He did it in less than an hour. Did you know today they still call it the greatest 45 minutes in sports? But that's not what Jesse Owens is famous for. He's famous for what happened next year, because in 1936 was the Olympics. And in 1936, the Olympics, guess where it was? Berlin, Germany. We got some history buffs in here. And you guys remember what was going on in the mid-30s in Germany? There was this upstart by the name of Adolf Hitler. We're trying to figure out who is this guy. He was spouting off about this idea of this Aryan race, this perfect race of people. And he was going to display this perfect race of people on the fields of friendly strife in the Olympics, so the world could see this perfect race of Germans. We see Jesse Owens showed up at that stadium with millions watching overseas and hundreds of thousands in the stadium. In front of Hitler himself, Jesse Owens put Western civilization on his shoulders and competed against all the best in the world, beating every one of them when he got 4 gold medals, including all of Hitler's champions, to the point that Hitler walked out of the stadium because Jesse Owens embarrassed him. But you know what most people don't realize about Jesse Owens? Is that he was actually a pack-a-day smoker for 35 years. He actually struggled with alcoholism. He died at an early age with complications of lung cancer. Do you know what Jesse Owens said towards the end of his life? He said, "The only victory that counts is the one over yourself." This was a man that took on Hitler, that took on the world's best, 4 gold medals in the Olympics, even defeated a racehorse. You can see it on YouTube. He raced against a racehorse in a 100-meter dash and beat the racehorse, but at the end of the day, he couldn't even beat his own beast. So what makes you think we got a shot? Well, that's why I developed what I call the 7 elements of the perfect day. In order to implement the 7 elements, we have to think about how we look at time, though. You see, we tend to romanticize the past, don't we? The good old days, how it used to be back in the day before cell phones. Actually going to the library, studying, right? Chat GDP, whatever that is, I don't know. The good old days. But sometimes things happen to you in the past you can't let go. You look in the rearview mirror. And we tend to overestimate the future. What can we do in the future? You know, finally when my kids move out and I'm an empty nester, finally I can do that. Or once this divorce is finalized, now I can lean into my life. Or once that guy or that gal finally retires and I don't have to report to him or her anymore, now I can lean into my career. We're always waiting for a set of conditions so we can live our lives. The problem with everybody in this room, we waste the present. What we have right now. The precious moment we have right now. Everybody who passed away yesterday had plans for today. That's why I think it's important, like John Wooden said, make each day your masterpiece. Because this is the only thing we've got right now. So let's talk about the perfect day for a moment. Can we talk about the perfect day? Now, gentlemen, I'm 50 years old right now, and I'm with some of you, and I know what you guys deal with now because I'm starting to deal with it too. Going to bed at night, you know it's a good night when you don't have to wake up and pee 35 times in the middle of the night. Guys, are you with me, older gentlemen in here? So it starts out, folks. If I wake up in the morning, I still got my retainers in my mouth, that means I didn't get up and pee 30 times in the middle of the night. That's the start of a perfect day right there. Jeez, come on now. I get in the shower, I take a nice hot shower, I look in the mirror, I'm having a pretty good hair day, I get on the weight scales, actually lost a couple pounds, that's awesome. I go in and get a nice hot cup of coffee, get in the car, nothing but green lights all the way to work. When I get to work, you know that pesky coworker that bugs you? He called in sick that day. There is a God, thank you. All the stuff you want to get accomplished that day, you get everything done. You even get all the stuff done, you get done early. So you actually leave work early. You get home and your spouse is waiting for you, and he or she says, "Hey, you want to go out to eat tonight? Why don't you choose the restaurant?" Wow, they never let me choose. You go to that restaurant and your favorite table right by the window, it's overlooking downtown, it's open. You get to sit at your favorite table. Your waiter that you just love, the best waiter in town, he's working that night. He doesn't even have to ask you what your favorite drink is because he already knows. Your favorite meal happens to be the special. It's a great night, great food, great ambiance. You get home and your teenage daughter happens to be at home and she looks at you and she smiles. You forgot she had teeth. You have a nice conversation with your daughter. At one point she says, "Hey, Dad, I just want you to know you're a good dad and I love you." Holy cow, my heart melts. My wife and I decide we're going to go to bed a little early and we're going to watch some Netflix. We're going to binge watch my favorite show, Suits. Come on now. That's my favorite show right now. And we're going to binge watch a couple episodes of that. And before we shut off the TV and go to bed, I take a big sigh of relief because I know today was a really good day. But that's not how most of our days look like, does it? Not only did you have to get up and pee in the middle of the night 30 times, you actually set a record. It was like 42 times. And when you finally got to sleep, your wife accidentally kicks you or does something that wakes you up and you can't go back to sleep. You go take your shower, and by the way, you forgot your son had to get up for 2-a-day practices and for football, and he decides he's going to listen to his entire playlist while he takes the hottest shower known to man. So when it's time for me to shower, it's ice cold. I go to get on the weight scales. Folks, I've been dieting for 2 weeks. The only thing I ate yesterday was a cracker, but yet I gained 2 pounds. How does that work? The coffee machine's broke. I get in the car. My wife forgot to tell me that there's no gas in the car, and it's nothing but red lights, and the one guy that has no place to be decides to drive right in front of me. It seems like he's going to the exact same place. I get to the parking lot, that pesky coworker I was telling you about, he's parked in my spot right now. He knows that's my spot. He's just being passive-aggressive now. He's waiting for me in my office, and he's in rare form. He's got some things he wants to talk to me about. All the things I had planned for that day, I get to none of it because it's fire after fire all day long, things that weren't planned all day long. I get nothing done. I get home from work late. I get in a fight with my daughter. My spouse says, hey, just get whatever's in the fridge so I have 2-day-old pizza. Well, at least I can go watch my Netflix show, right? Internet's down. That's what most of the days are like, aren't they? Do you know what the difference is between the perfect day and the day that a lot of us experience? It's the beast. It's not what happens to you. It's how we react to it. And that little whisper in there, like, she should respect you. Or why'd he park in your spot? You need to go and give peace of your mind. And we get bogged down in these little things that the beast tells us important that it's not. That's why we got to protect ourselves from it. And that's why I developed what I call the 7 elements of the perfect day. If you follow these elements, folks, these are levels of protection, what I look at it as priority, that the beast, if it's going to get to you, it's going to have to chew through all 7 layers. So I spent the last decade and a half. Now, folks, this isn't theory. This is what I'm doing today myself. I do it every single day. And we're going to talk about the first one, and I'm going to show you how you can get access to my books and things like that if you want to study this and get more into it. But let's talk about managing priorities. Now, back in the 1950s, this is a true story, there was this business titan, this businessman in New York City. He was the talk about town. He had the best office and the best building at the top floor. This guy was awesome. He was killing it. But like all professionals, he wanted to get better. So he hired an organizational consultant to come and give him some ideas and some thoughts on how he could be more efficient. So he hired this guy, and the guy came to his office, and the businessman looked at him and said, listen, I don't have a lot of time. I just want you to give me your best tip. Give me your best tip. I want to follow that tip for 90 days. We'll get back together, and I will write you a check based on how valuable I think that tip was. Now, this is back in the 40s, before computers, before cell phones, all those things. So the consultant said, here's what I want you to do. He pulled out a 3x5 card. He said, I want you to take a 3x5 card like this, and every day you start your day, I want you to write down the 3 most important things you want to get done that day. And when you start your day, you pull out that 3x5 card and you look at number 1. Don't worry about number 2. And if you get number 1, that's great. Number 1 done, that's great. Then go to number 2. Don't worry about number 3. And if all you do is get 2 things done that day, that's fine. Reset for the next day. If you only get 1 thing, that's fine. Reset for the next day. If you get all 3 things done and you want to do some other stuff, that's fine too. But understand what the 3 most important things are and do that. So that business person, the guy that was the best in New York City, talk about town, tried that for 90 days. When they got back together after 90 days, the business person looked at the consultant. He didn't say anything. He just pulled out his checkbook and wrote a check. Now think about this. This is like in the 1940s. He wrote a check for $25,000 and handed it to him and said that was the best piece of advice anybody's ever given me. Why? Because there's science behind this. And here's what the science says. The science says that when you start your day, you only have only so much brain power inside, right? It's almost like you have a plug-in like your phone. And when you start your day, you start to burn calories as you start to make decisions. And you start to burn energy out of your brain. And your first task of the day, the science suggests that you got 80 to 100% brain power at that point. Now, when you get to task number 2, the study suggests that your brain power goes down to about 60 to 80%. And by the time you get to the 3rd decision of the day, you're working with about 40 to 60% brain power. How many of you have ever been brain dead before? Not you, Sandy, all right? Not you, Gene. How many of you have been brain dead before? You know what I'm talking about? You're so tired you're reading an email or you're reading a book or reading an article and you read the same sentence like 5 times because you can't comprehend it. Have you ever been so tired that your voice slurs when you're talking? Here's what happens, folks. Is we set ourselves up for failure every single day because we load ourselves down with so much junk that we don't focus on the things that matter. We don't major on the majors. Did you know that's the number 1 tactic of the beast? Is to keep you busy doing nothing, right? Have you ever finished the end of your day and you were busy all day long? You actually had to skip lunch because you didn't have enough time. And you go back and think about what you actually accomplished, Pat, and you realize, what did I actually get done that was meaningful? I was a busybody all day, but what did I actually do to move the needle? So what I recommend, folks, is I want to challenge you for the next 50 days. You can actually go on my website and you can purchase these little Post-it notes that says your big 3 on it. There's 50 of them. I challenge you to try it for 50 days. And I challenge you to write down the 3 most important things you want to get done that day. Now, here's the thing. It's not the 3 most important things at work, the 3 most important things with your family, or the 3 most important things personally. I'm talking about the 3 most important things in your life. And start building a boundary around that. I want to tell you something. It's going to get messy. You're going to drop some balls in your life. But you know what? You probably need to drop some of those balls in your life, because the ones that you're not juggling right are the ones that are most important to you. Don't let the beast talk you out of not living your life under priority. That's why it's important. Now try it for 50 days and see what happens. And what will happen is your body will adjust. Now, there's the other 7 elements I talk in the book. I got some other resources for you. I'll share with you a little bit later. But I recommend each and every one of you in this room, because I know there's some people in this room that are dying on the vine right now. I know you are. You're going from week to week just trying to get through. You're exhausted. You're tired. And these things will help you. All right, let's talk about number 3. Become an encourager. Now, why is this important? Well, if you want to lead a life of significance, folks, you can't do it by yourself. There is no example of any man or any woman leading any life of significance without the help of others. You need others, folks, to be successful. In fact, every one of you in this room right now are where you are because of someone. Someone walked alongside you, a coach. They edified you. A teacher, a parent, an uncle, a neighbor, a loved one. And if you're going to continue on your journey, you're going to need the help of others. And the way we connect with one another, folks, is through what is called the power of encouragement. Why? Because people always remember how you make them feel. You see, at the end of the day, nobody cares about who you are or what you know. All they care about deep down inside is how you make them feel. How you make them feel about you, how you make them feel about the world, but more importantly, how do you make them feel about themselves? Each and every one of you evaluate your relationships based on the emotion of the relationship. And the way we connect with one another is through what is called the act of sacrifice. Now, by a show of hands in here, I'm just curious, how many veterans do we have in the room? Raise your hand if you're a veteran. Give a hand for our veterans, my lands. That's awesome. Good job. We got no runners in the room, but we got veterans, for crying out loud. That is fantastic. Now, if you ask a veteran, any veteran in this room, you ask them what they miss most about serving, to a man or a woman, they all answer the same. They miss the people. Right, Gene? They miss the comrades. They miss the people that they serve with. Why is that? Because when you're in the military, or if you play high-level sports, when you sacrifice for another human being, when you sacrifice your time, your money, your ego, your life or limb, you form a connection with that person that can never be broken. It's the most powerful form of connection with another person is when you sacrifice. And ladies and gentlemen, when you sacrifice for someone, you form that connection, you edify them, and you encourage them. And there are 3 ways in which you sacrifice: time, money, and ego. How many of you in here have ever been to New York City? Anybody ever been to New York City in here? Well, when I travel, I get to travel all over the country, Sandy, and when I go to really cool places, my family comes with me. And we were going to New York. I was actually working with the New York Power Authority, and so I decided to take my family with me. And I decided we were going to stay a couple extra days, Kelly, and what we're going to do is we're going to check out all of New York City, like all the tourist type places. Think about Vacation or Clark Griswold. That was me. I had this wide eyes of what this perfect vacation was going to look like. And I decided we were going to stay downtown New York City, and we were going to experience New York the way New Yorkers experience. And I was going to do all the subway stuff, right? I thought, how hard could this be? So I went down there with this idea that we were going to hit all these hot spots, and I went down the subway system with my family. Within 2 minutes, folks, I realized I was way out of my league. Because in 2 minutes, about 1,000 people pushed me, and they moved me around. I had no idea what I was doing. Now, of course, I couldn't tell my family that, right? And I had this pit in my stomach as I was trying to figure out, where do I go? Do I just get on a subway and just see where it takes us? Well, out of those 1,000 people that passed me, there was one guy that slowed down and he made eye contact with me. And he walked over to me and he kind of whispered to me, and he goes, hey, you look like you're kind of lost. Is there something I can do to help you? And Pat, I whispered back at him because I didn't want my family to hear, but I said, listen, I'm trying to figure out how to get to the Statue of Liberty. I don't know what subway to get on. Can you help me? And he said, oh, that's the subway I'm going on. Just follow me. So I just blindly followed my new friend to this subway, take my family. We get on that subway car with him. We start driving with him to where we wanted to go. Now, as we started on the subway system, he introduced himself to us. It turns out his name was Mackey. Outside of 4 years in Vanderbilt University, he lived his entire life in New York City. And he worked at the United Nations. He was a writer, and he was leaving work that day. And he said, what do you guys want to do on this day in New York? And we kind of explained to him. And he asked us a question. He goes, hey, how would you like to see New York from a New Yorker's perspective? I can show you guys around. And I looked at my wife, and I'm like, well, this could end one of two ways, right? Right? We could end in a shallow grave with our kidneys gone, right? It's a Lifetime movie. Or this could be the greatest day of our life. So we decided to hang out with Mackey, and for the next 6.5 hours, Mackey took us on the most unbelievable tour of New York City. First stop, Chinatown. We go down to Chinatown. He's like a walking encyclopedia. He's like, hey, look around. These people you see here, none of them speak English. They will live their entire life within a 2-block radius. Think about that. They never leave within a 2-block radius. And he said 2 things you'll never see in Chinatown. You'll never see food inspectors, and you'll never see police. They don't come down here because they police themselves. And he's like, hey, do you guys want to try a New York hot dog? I said, yeah, let's do that. So he takes us to this really cool hot dog stand. He looks at the guy and says, hey, these are my friends. Can you give them the New York prices? What? There's 2 different prices? Right? They gouge all of you guys when you go out there, when I go out there, but there's a separate pricing system. So he said, here's the hot dog, and you need to eat it the way we eat it. I'm like, how do you eat it, Mackey? He's like, mustard and relish. Don't insult this by putting ketchup on it. All right, Mackey. So we ate it just the way we're supposed to eat it. Then he's like, let's go to the Brooklyn Bridge. We go to the Brooklyn Bridge. You can walk across. It's this iconic, beautiful bridge. And we're walking across it, and he stops all the traffic. He grabs my phone. He takes this beautiful picture of my family. Turns out he's a professional photographer, too. Then we decided to go to the Statue of Liberty. He showed us how to get there and not have to pay anything to do it. He knows how to game the system. And so we're going on this great trip to the Statue of Liberty. And after about 6.5 hours, my kids are calling him Uncle Mackey at the end of it. And it was time for us to part ways. And I look at Mackey after this whole day with Mackey. And I said, Mackey, can I pay you for your time? And he goes, no, don't worry about it. I said, Mackey, you don't know us. Why are you doing this? He said, listen, I know this may be the only time that your kids will ever come to New York. And I know this might be the only time they can experience this as a family. And I want them to realize that New York's a kind of a cool place. And that New Yorkers, we're kind of cool. And I said, thanks, Mackey, I appreciate it. And he kind of tipped his hat, gave us a hug, and he literally stepped back in the crowd and disappeared. It was like a movie. And I told my wife, I said, I think we just hung out with Jesus Christ, right? I think we hung out with an angel. And I wrote a blog post about it. At the time, I had 20,000 followers. I wrote a blog post about it. You could probably YouTube or Google it now. It was called The New York City Angel. And it went viral because it turns out Mackey does this all the time. He finds people and serves them and shows them around New York City. Did you know what I found out about Mackey that day? You know why he was leaving work early? He was actually fired from work. How many of you, when you just got fired at work, the first thing you want to do is help somebody else? Let me ask you a bigger question. How many of you have been too busy to help someone? You ask somebody how they're doing, and they give you that look, and you can tell something's wrong, but you got a full day scheduled. You see, our entire day was changed that day because one person slowed down enough to sacrifice his time. Even to this day, we send Uncle Mackey Christmas cards. My 25th anniversary, I took my wife to New York City. Guess who I called? Mackey. Guess who spent the whole day with us? Mackey, taking us all around New York City. Turns out he's a professional photographer. So I asked Mackey for our 25th anniversary, can he take a special picture just for us so I commissioned to take it, and this is what he took. He's famous for taking reflections off the water. He made that picture just for us. If you were to buy that in a gallery, because he sells his pictures, it's $5,000. And he got it just for us. It's framed in my wall at our home. And every time I see that, it reminds me that sometimes we have to walk slowly in a crowd and sacrifice our time for others. Money. When you sacrifice your hard-earned money for another person, it could be a fundraiser like this right here. It's a great charity that you guys raised $23,000 last year. Listen, I think you guys could raise $30,000 this year. And when you impact people by giving your money and sacrificing, that is a connection that you make for others because you're sacrificing your hard-earned money. And people see that as a sacrifice. The third one is sacrificing your ego. How many of you in here are better arguers after the fact? You know what I'm talking about? You have an argument with someone, and then afterwards you think about all the things you should have said, like, oh man, I wish I just would have said that, right? And you can't get it off your heart. You go back that night, you go home, and all you're doing is thinking about this fight. Let's say his name was Eddie. You're thinking about all the things you should have said to Eddie. In fact, you write down your points because you're going to talk to Eddie about this tomorrow. The next day you get up, you get to work early, and you got 25 points you're going to give Eddie, and you see Eddie come, and you can't wait to give Eddie a piece of your mind because now you're going to win this argument. Before you could say anything, though, Eddie looks at you and says, hey, Eric, I just want to apologize about what happened yesterday. And you're like, oh, Eddie, why'd you have to do that, man? Because how can you argue with someone when they take their ego, they rip it out of their heart, and they lay it at your feet? Because we know how hard it is to say we're wrong, don't we? And when someone comes to you and says, I'm sorry, you see that as a sacrifice, as it changes everything. Let me ask you something. How many of you right now are in a relationship with someone, and if they just said, I'm sorry, it would change the relationship? How about a deeper question? How many of you, if you just said you're sorry, it would change the relationship? What are you waiting for? Sacrifice your ego, and you form that connection with that person. Sacrifice for someone today. Number 4 of the 5 principles, become an influencer. If you're going to lead a life of significance, folks, you're going to need the help of others. However, when you're working with other people, life changes, things change. You're going to evolve. And if people that you're doing life with don't change with you, there's going to be gaps in your relationships. That's why sometimes you see people who've been married for 40 years get divorced because over time they grew apart, right? Or people leave their jobs because they grew apart from their colleagues. If you're going to leave a life of significance, you're going to need to evolve, but you're also going to have to influence others to evolve with you. And how you do that is you influence human behavior. That's what influencers do. Influencers influences and change human behavior. Like Dr. Martin Luther King is a good example. He focuses on a key measurement of success. What was his key to success? What I love about Dr. Martin Luther King, I'm just a history buff. And I like to go back and look at figures in our country that changed the conversation. He was one that did. Why? Because he decided that he was going to start a conversation in our country, whether we wanted to or not, but he had an idea of how he wanted to do it. And this is what Dr. Martin Luther King believed. He said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy to a friend. So here's what he decided to do. We're going to have the conversation. It's going to get uncomfortable. We're going to march. We're going to protest. But he told his people, the people that he was working with at that time to start the conversation, he said, the only thing I care about is that every time we do something like this, we have to do it out of love, or I don't want to do it. We can't do it out of hate. That's the only measurement he used to set upon what he wanted to do in our country. And because of that, he forced us to start a conversation. We celebrate him today because of one key measurement of success, and that was, did we do it out of love? But I want to bring it a little closer to home. This is my daughter, Ashley Montina Rheam. I'm a girl dad. Raise your hand in here if you're a girl dad. All right, girl dads, you know what I'm talking about. And so I knew I wanted to connect with my daughter. We started out with dance. I thought, well, let's try this. I got to tell you, I went to the first recital, and after about 2.5 hours, Pat, I wanted to take a shiv and jam it in my retina. There's like no way I can do this. I told my daughter, we got to find something else. And so we started looking into softball. It turns out she kind of likes softball. But here's the thing, folks. I didn't know anything about softball. And so I began to study the game. And I realized there was a lot of facets of the game, but there was one part of the game that I knew if my daughter could get down, this one measurement of success, there would always be a place for her on a team. And that was getting on base. So I went to my daughter and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on getting you on base. I don't care how we do it. If you hit the ball, you get walked or get hit by the ball, it doesn't matter. Let's get you on the base. And so I got her a bat, a really nice one. I got her some coaches to teach her how to hit. And once I realized how this whole hitting thing works and how the mechanics are, I started working with my daughter. And I got a bucket of balls, and every morning before school and every night before dinner, I was out there with this bucket of balls pitching to my daughter over and over again. So much so, there's scar tissue, folks, in my shoulder. You can hear it click when I do that. Practicing on how to hold her hands, how to hold her feet. Everything, every facet they hit the ball. We didn't worry about catching. We didn't worry about fielding. We didn't worry about running the base. All we worried about was hitting that stupid ball. Fast forward a couple years later, we're at a big tournament. My daughter's on a travel softball team. She goes up to bat. It's nighttime. The lights are on. Her family's in the stands. I don't know why, but their whole family was there. Her brothers, my wife, my mom and dad were there. I was in the dugout. I was the third coach. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm talking about? I had no relevance whatsoever other than, good job, girls. You can do it. That was me. And I was in the dugout as my daughter went up to the home plate with the bases loaded. There were 2 outs. She looked at the pitcher. The pitcher, I swear to you, was 6'5" with a hint of a mustache. She took that ball and she pitched it fast right down the middle. My daughter swung that bat, but she swung it too late and she fouled it off. The girls in the outfield started to creep in because my daughter's like 5'2", 90 pounds. That's very insulting when the outfield creeps up, right? I don't know how my daughter did it, but somehow she was able to foul it off enough times. She got enough balls. She got a full count. That's 3 balls, two strikes, bases loaded, 2 outs. The girls in the outfield were now standing in the dirt. But what they didn't realize is that my daughter and I, all we practiced on was one simple thing, hitting the ball. And I watched that pitcher wind up. She's now like 6'8". I watched her wind up, and she threw that ball down as hard as she can. And I saw something familiar as my daughter's muscles twitched. I saw it because I saw it 1,000 times. And I watched her bring that bat around like we practiced every night. And I watched her keep her head down, and she made contact. Her wrist stayed strong. I could hear the sound of that ball come off the bat. It's the most beautiful sound anybody played softball when you hit that sweet spot. And I watched that ball leap off the bat and that pitcher look up as that ball go over her head. And the girls in the outfield, they're drop stepping as they try to catch the ball. It was too late. My daughter was around second base when she realized that not only did she hit the ball with 2 outs on a full count, but she hit it over the fence as she watched the ball go for a grand slam. And I watched her round that corner, and I saw her in her eyes as all the girls came out of the dugout, and they picked her up, and they held her up, and I could see it in my daughter's eyes. I knew in that moment, you guys know this at your dads and moms, I knew in that moment that was a life-changing moment that she's going to remember for the rest of her life. She drank some tea right before she went out to hit, and all the girls like, it's got to be magical tea. So they all were drinking that tea afterwards. But today, I have a beautiful young lady. She actually just graduated from college, and she actually works at my company now. She works with me, but she has confidence, and she can navigate the world. Because of simple things of just getting on base, a measurement of success. So here's the action item for each and every one of you. Identify a key measure in your life, something that's changing in your life that needs to evolve. What's the key measurement of success? Like for me, I pay my kids to read chapters in books. That's the measurement. If they're reading, I know they're going to do well. All right, number 5, and we'll close this out, mastering communication. How many of you in here are big into movies? You like movies? Anybody like movies? All right. Every movie has a hero in it. Like, for instance, Star Wars. Who's the hero? Luke Skywalker. How about Rocky? Who's the hero? Rocky. How about the Karate Kid? Who's the hero? Daniel LaRusso. Well, here's the problem, folks. Every one of you in this room right now, you're living out your own movie. And in that movie, you are the hero of your own story. When someone else tries to go in your story and they try to be your hero, you can't have 2 heroes in a story. And when that happens, folks, there's conflict. You know what that looks like? It's the person at work that never shuts up. You know what I'm talking about? They take over the meetings. They end your sentences. They take over the agenda, right? They're annoying because they're trying too hard to be the hero. Instead of being the hero, folks, what people need is they need the guide. Like, for instance, in Rocky, guess who the guide is? Mickey. Who's the guide in Karate Kid? Mr. Miyagi. Who's the guide in Star Wars? Obi-Wan Kenobi. Don't be the hero in people's lives. If you have a conflict with someone right now, spoiler alert, every one of you is in conflict with someone, I guarantee it, most likely, you're trying too hard to be the hero in that person's story. They don't need you to be Daniel LaRusso. They need you to be Mr. Miyagi. My wife is struggling that right now with my daughter. She's 20 years old. Her whole entire life, she's been her mom, her mother. And it's hard for her mother to step back and allow my daughter to take the main stage. So if you find yourself in conflict with someone, ask yourself, are you trying to be the hero in their lives? So the action item is, be aware of the role you have in others' lives. Okay, so it went by fast. It's a quick journey. These are the 5 principles that I live out my life today. These are the 5 principles that I work with utilities with at retreats, at workshops. We unpack these together. Number 1, embrace your spiritual journey. Number 2, tame the beast. Number 3, leverage encouragement. Number 4, ignite your influence. And number 5, master human dynamics and communication. These were some of the action items that I gave you today. If you want to start on this journey, these are some things that you can do. But if you do nothing else, the one thing I recommend you do is sacrifice for others. Ladies and gentlemen, if we just did that more, how better would our communities be if we just thought more about other people and how can I sacrifice for them? If you did nothing else, that's the first step on your significance journey. Now, I started out with my rock bottom, but I'm here to tell you that life is good now. My wife and I have never been more in love than we are now. If we were to get remarried again, my dad would still be my best man. I talk to my dad every single day. In fact, I'll call my dad tonight. And I'm living out my best version of myself because I found out my why. And here's the thing I discovered. Once I got back on path and I rose above my own chaos and discovered significance, the one thing I discovered that I didn't realize I needed was peace. Because when I wake up every single day, there's purpose in what I do. I know what I'm doing. I know the impact I'm making, and peace awaited me because of that. Each and every one of you can find peace of your life if you start to follow some of these principles. I guarantee it. So I want to invite you on that journey for those of you who want to join me with me. And all you got to do if you want to get a book, it's at riseabovechaosbook.com. I brought a few books with me because I know some people want them right now. I'm willing to sign them if you want them. I don't want to disrupt anything, so I'll meet you right outside this door. If anybody wants a copy of the book, come see me. If you want to follow me on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram, that's the way you get a hold of me. Or if you just want to contact me personally, I know I don't look like that anymore, okay? Don't mention that, Pat. That's pre-pandemic. Something happened. Pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, all right? All of you had the same thing, so don't get on me with this. All right, if you want to contact me, this is the way you can do it. And finally, I just want to say thank you to Doug. Thank you so much, Missy, Ryan, and all the great OEC staff that put this together. Can we give them a hand? They did a fantastic job. You guys did a good job. Awesome, good job. I do want to thank the guys in the back. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Dan. They did a good job. Give them a hand. They're doing a fantastic job back there. And then finally, I want to thank each and every one of you because you're making a difference. You are fantastic grandparents. I talked to a lot of you today, husbands and wives. You're making a difference, but more importantly, you're here. And because you're here, that tells me you want to be better at what you do. On behalf of my family, because my family likes to live and eat indoors, thank you for allowing me to come up here and provide for my family. Because if you wouldn't allow me to do this, Missy, I couldn't do that. So thank you, and I want to leave you with this. The future, including of what's left of the day, is a blank canvas. What will you create? Go out and create something significant. You guys are awesome. Appreciate you. Thanks. I appreciate it.